Okay, so it's week 11. So what we're going to do is we want to start with a brand new application from scratch. So, I mean, we could save time by like starting it as a template, but what I want to show you is how we start from absolute nothing and build a full mean stack application. So we're going to start with the Express generator. We'll make a brand new application. We'll add in just a few things from the video game library, like we'll add in our database connection file and we'll add in our model. We won't recreate those things, but everything else we'll do from scratch. And then we'll fold Angular into that. Okay. So for starters, if you want to open up a command prompt and jump into your node folder. So I would say we're probably going to spend at least an hour just starting to configure things. It'll be a while before we actually have anything running. But I want to go through this process step by step with you so that you know how to do it in case you want to build something else from scratch using this process. So I figured we'll do it the slow way. So the first thing we'll do is let's set up a lesson 11 project using the Express generator. Just in your root node folder, do Express lesson 11 -e. It doesn't really matter actually whether we use -e or not, because ultimately our front end is going to be HTML and Angular. We're not actually going to wind up using EJS for our front end. We will for now, but we'll get rid of it and blow it away later. So whether we use EJS or Jade as the template engine, it doesn't really matter. So use the generator, which runs in about a half a second. And then change directories, go into lesson 11 and run npm install to download the Express dependencies. So go into your newly created project and let's run npm install. Now, there is a new version of NPM out. You may get a prompt. In my morning class, I got a prompt to update my NPM. So if you get that, you can run the command, which is simply, it tells you what command to run. Did anybody get that, a prompt to update NPM? Okay, then don't worry about it. So now I should be able to just run npm start, and we get our basic Express generator template that we've all seen a bunch of times before. I probably should have used nodemon instead of npm start because it's not going to refresh now. So we're going to add a couple of files, but not many, from our lesson 9 project. We basically want our configuration file that has our database credentials, so we don't have to go and get those again. And we're going to want our game model, because we're going to reuse those. So I'm going to copy those files in, and actually I think I'm even going to go back. I won't get lesson 9 because lesson 9 also has my Facebook and Google API keys. We're not using these. This application will be public. There won't be any authentication. So I don't need those keys. It's no big deal if they're in here, but we don't need them. So maybe what I'll do is go back a little further. So I'll go to lesson 6. That was the week we kind of finished CRUD. And just copy config and models. And there's one file in each of those folders. So you can go to my lesson 6 repository on GitHub. But most of you have been here and you have these files of your own. Easier if you have your own config file because it's got your database credentials already there. So just copy those config and models.
You only need to gain the single.
Yeah, models. There's only the single model. Doesn't matter. We didn't change it, so you can take it from lesson 4, lesson 5. Sorry, 5 or 6. It'll be the same. If you take it from 8 or 9, no problem. It just has some extra. It has the Google and your Google and Facebook keys in lesson 9. Lesson 8 doesn't have them.
Should we have taken over JSON, package.json?
Nope. Nope.
So I did like npm init at the beginning. I didn't.
You don't need to do npm init because when we use the generator, it builds package.json for you. So just paste in the config and the models. So config has just one file, which is our globals. And models just has one file, which is our game. Again, if you took a more recent version and you have your account model here, that's fine. It's not going to break anything. I've just excluded it because we really don't need it. So now I'll open up my code editor and open up my lesson 11 project. If you're using WebStorm, you may have noticed they've updated to version 2017.1 very recently.
Sorry, we can use a lesson 8, that's okay?
Yep, fine. That's fine. Lesson 8's fine. As long as all we need is we just want the model and the database configuration, because we're not changing those at all. So rather than recreate them, we may as well just use them as is, rather than taking time to rebuild those files. Basically, any file, any of those from lesson 5, 6, 8, or 9 would work. So here's our game model. We're going to use it, but we're not going to change it. We're just going to work with it. Okay. Now we do need to install Mongoose in this application, right? We've got our connection. We just have the base express dependencies. So I'm going to stop my server for a minute. And let's install Mongoose with the ---- save option. It'll add it to package.json. And then we'll need to add a couple lines back into our app.js to connect to the database. If you want to make this even shorter, you can now use npm I. I is just short for install. It does the same command with ---- save. You can use install or you can use I. It'll do the same. I'm always in favor of less typing rather than more. So install Mongoose with ---- save. And npm should add it to package.json for us. So far, this should all be familiar to everybody. So now in our app.js, so this is just like the straight out of the box Express generator. We can actually remove a few things. Let's actually get rid of the error handling. We're not going to use the error.ejs while we're developing. If things crash, we'll just let them crash. We just want to see the error messages. So starting on line 28 and all the way down to line 44, these two blocks for error handling, we can get rid of them. It's okay if you leave them there, probably make life easier if we take those out. So now at the top, Mongoose. And let's also reference our config file. And then we can connect to MongoDB. So if I restart my server with NodeMon, we shouldn't actually see anything. We're not printing out any message. But if it loads with no errors, then we know we're connected to MongoDB. So we just added these 3 lines. So I'll use NodeMon this time. My password probably is not in my config file. Okay. I'd taken my password out. Now everything's running fine. I can refresh. No errors. We're not actually displaying any message that we're connected, but obviously if things are wrong in our connection, we'll see an error in our command line. By the way, on a sort of related question, from the start of this course to now, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you rate your comfort level with the command line at the start of the course and now?
Like 8 or 9.
6, 8, 9, 7,
7. It depends on
7. Where would it have been in January? 1,
3.
4, 5, 1. Okay, well, that's good. So that's a side benefit of doing this stuff in Node through the command line. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so our app is set up here, which is good. Let's just hide this. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to start setting up Angular. Now, last week, the way we did it was we used the Angular Quick Start and we used the Angular CLI package, and it kind of like the generator, Express generator, it scaffolded out an Angular app. It created a whole bunch of files for us automatically. Okay. Now, what we're going to do, we're not going to use that interface. So there's several Angular files we need to set up. A few of them we're going to hand code, and a few of them I've put online on GitHub, and we can grab them from there. So in our root, let's make a new directory here, and let's call it client. And we need some Angular configuration files here. There's going to be 3 JSON files and 1 small JS file that contains 1 JavaScript function. So these are things, again, last week that the Angular CLI built for us. I don't want to use it because it's going to give us a whole bunch of other stuff we won't really need. But I'll show you where the files are and what we need. Okay. And we can you can either download them. I'm going to copy and paste them one at a time from GitHub, the content. So in a browser tab, please just go to my GitHub. So go to github.com/ifotn. Take you here. And right here, there's a repo that says Angular starter. Actually, wait, no, that's not that one. It's this one, COMP2106 Angular starter file. So click repositories, click in here. So the first one we want is package.json. So I'll click on it and then I'll just click raw. And I'll just select everything. Yours probably doesn't look like this. Yours probably looks like this. Yeah, I'll show you how to deal with that after. So there's our raw JSON. So just grab this. And inside of client, we're going to make a new package.json. So we actually have two package.jsons. Express has one and Angular has its own. The Angular one lives, all the Angular stuff lives inside the client folder. All the Express stuff lives outside. So we'll make a package.json, replace what's here. And we can give this any name we want, doesn't matter. So you'll notice the way that this starts. When we start our Angular, it runs the TSC. What we talked about TSC last week, we installed it. What does TSC do? Right, it compiles all our TypeScript into JavaScript. So we're going to write our Angular code in TypeScript, and so when we run the server, it will compile all this, and it also will launch its own light server, an Angular server, which we may or we may not need. Here are all the dependencies. So we're going to need to run npm install in a bit, and npm will download all these dependencies that Angular needs. So that was the first one. And then we want these other two. We'll come back to the HTML file in a minute. So this is the JavaScript file. Basically sets up a path to each of these libraries. Using npm, this is where to get each dependency. So we're going to grab that one and save it. So this one is the one JavaScript file. It's called system.js.config.js. Same name as you see on GitHub. Again, if you want to just download them all, the files as they are, that's fine. You don't have to do it one at a time. So we've got system.js.config.js. Paste that in. So it's pointing each dependency to a particular package, place within our app folder. We don't have an app folder yet, but we will. We'll then grab the other two files. They're both JSON files. We have a TypeScript configuration called tsconfig.json. Our TypeScript compiler is going to need this file to know how to compile our TypeScript. It sets up a bunch of options. And in fact, my editor even expects it right here. It's got a pre-filled template for tsconfig.json. So the version we have just has more options added to it. And the last one is a really small JSON file called typings.json. So we want that one as well. So we'll copy that. Our last one is typings.json.
All these go on client folder?
Yep. They all go on client. Now later on, what I think we're going to do, all of this other stuff for Express, we're going to wind up not using. We're not going to use the public folder anymore. We're not even going to use the Express views in EJS. We'll probably delete those. And we may move this roots. We may create a server folder and put our roots inside. So again, I kind of mapped out the architecture of what this looked like last week, but I think it's probably worth me putting up my diagram again. I probably should create some kind of visual. So here we have our UI. We have our two Angular layers, our component, which we built last week, our service, which is going to be new, and then we have our Express controller, our model, and finally our MongoDB. So what we may do is actually move the models and the routes into a subfolder called server. So we know that's all the back-end code, all the Express stuff. And all the front end, all the Angular stuff it all lives inside of our client folder. It's a typical way. There's different kinds of architecture patterns. I know, for example, so ASAT, I know you're using similar kind of architecture for Project Studio. How did you set up your folders? Mm-hmm.
I create the server folder in root, and all of my models and routes and other stuff lives in there. But my server.js is in the Angular CLI.
Okay. All right. So there's different ways of structuring it, but later on, I think we'll do that. We'll move this inside of a subfolder called server, which will force us to change the paths a little bit. Because rather than being in the root, those folders will be inside of a subfolder. Okay, nothing really should change. Our app should still be running here with NodeMon in any way yet. So the last file that we want, right now when our Express application loads, right, it's loading our views index.ejs file. We're not going to use this anymore. Now, so that brings me to the other file that's in our Angular starter. Our index.html. So this kind of is a sample that comes from the Angular. They've kind of set this up as a default template. Now I've added Bootstrap. And just to keep it simple, I just used the CDN for today rather than local paths for Bootstrap, although maybe we want to change that. This is just some Angular stuff for dealing with older browsers. And then I created a nav bar with no links, just a name of the application that will reload the page. We can click it, it'll reload the home page. And this tag here, we're going to change this, but this is where we'll inject our Angular application. So this is like our main page template. Kind of the opposite of the way we did our EJS templates. Right, our EJS templates, we created the individual views, and then we had a separate header and footer that we stuck on every page. Here we're doing the opposite. This is almost like an ASP.NET master page. This is our template that all the pages will share, and then any Angular components get injected in the middle, like in ASP content. So it's kind of the reverse of how we did templating with EJS. So I want you to grab this. Grab all the HTML here, and I'll show you where to save it. I'll copy that. And we want this to go inside of the client folder. We're going to make a new directory called app. Angular is going to look for that. So we'll create an app directory. And our app directory is going to have 3 subfolders: views, where the HTML lives, components, and services. So for now, we just need an app and views. So inside of app, make a new directory called views. And we're going to put our index.html in here. So now I'll make a new HTML page. And we'll paste all that stuff in. So this is now like our site master page. It's got our header, it's got our footer, and anything we do in Angular gets injected into the main section. I might make a couple changes here. I could fix the typo in the footer. In my nav bar, maybe I'll change this to say COMP2106 game library, and I'll change my title up here as well. Now, nothing's changed yet here. When we load our home page, we're still getting our EJS view from the generator. So what we want to do is we want our localhost 3000 URL to load this page instead. We don't want it to load our EJS views from the Express generator anymore. So we need to do a couple configuration changes. In our app.js, first of all, right now, we have no way to really interpret HTML. So we want to tell the server to be basically rendering HTML rather than EJS. We're not going to use EJS at all. The second thing we need to do is we need to change the path. So when we go into our app.js, this line is set up automatically, right? Views are found in the folder called views. Well, we don't want that anymore. Instead, we want to change this. What folder now contains the views? Yeah, so client/app/views. We're also going to add configuration so that it knows what to do with HTML documents. So if the engine is HTML, we want to be able to render HTML files. Now let's see what happens if we refresh. Okay, we have one more small change. Notice it's in the right path now. It's trying to load a file called index from client app views, so that's good, that's progress, but it didn't quite work. We have to make one more change. Yeah, so in our route, so inside of index.js, instead of calling res.render here, I think what we just need to do is add on the extension that we're explicitly rendering an HTML file. And we can take this title out. We're not passing anything to it anymore. If this doesn't work, we may need to change the function to res.render file. But I think it should work. So in effect, we've replaced that EJS. We don't need it anymore.
So we delete the old view.
Yeah, we're not going to use this views, so let's just delete them. We're not going to use it at all. So I'll just delete The views directory. Unnecessary.
Public directory.
We don't need we don't need public either. We can get rid of that. I guess the other thing, well, let's think about it. Yeah, this public directory, because we use a generator, it's all empty. There's nothing here. Maybe we'll want to copy our public directory from an earlier lesson because it does contain Bootstrap and jQuery. And then we could reference those things locally. May not be a bad idea. So we'll blow away this public directory. Kerbej, did you have a question?
If you, instead of putting .html in here, we can also put it in the app.js and just above the app.js. Yeah, instead of EJS, we can also write HTML there.
So you mean change the view engine to HTML here, and then we don't need it in the router. Okay, good suggestion. Try that. So we're setting up, that probably makes more sense to just configure it to use HTML only. Yep, still works fine. Good suggestion. Thank you for that. So both will work. I like your suggestions, more efficient. So I took the extension off, and here I changed the view engine from EJS to HTML. I'm not sure if we even need this line that we added now. I'm going to take it out and see. I think it'll probably work without it.
The whole line.
The app engine. Setting the view engine as HTML, I doubt we need to do this.
I get an error.
Yeah. No, I didn't work when I took that out.
Works fine for me.
Didn't work for me. Okay, let's also set up. I was kind of lazy, so I did the, if we just go back to our index.html, I used the Bootstrap CDN, but maybe we should create inside of app. So we've got a views folder. So maybe we should create also a public folder with our images, style sheets, and JavaScript. We've already got that. It has all the files we need. So I'll just maybe go back to my any lesson, really, lesson 9 will have it. I'm going to grab my public folder. Now, where do you think it would make sense? So I'm going to take public. We definitely want it inside of client. We want it inside of app, so we could paste it right here. So we'll have our images, style sheets, and JavaScript also inside of our client front end. And then I could probably replace, now that we've got public, let me change this. So I'll change my href here to make it local. Inside of public, style sheets. So we'll add Bootstrap and the Bootstrap theme. And we can also add a script for jQuery, which maybe I'll put down here after my footer. Oops. Actually, we're going to want all of the JavaScript files inside of. We'll want our Bootstrap and we'll want our client scripts. Thought we had jQuery in here. I'm surprised we don't. We may have to grab it. Yeah, we're going to want that later for our delete. So quickly, I better just download jQuery as well. I thought I had it. I'm surprised I don't have it in here. But I'll just go and download and reference jQuery as well. So I'll just go and grab the minified version from code.jquery.com. Okay, my path didn't quite work, did it?
Maybe that's the part of the DJS.
Well, that's a good point. And then we can change the paths. Yeah, so here we set the static directory as public. Yeah, so just like we did for the views, if we prefix our static path as client /app/ public, then we can change those paths. So just like we changed our view path to client app, we'll change our static path to client app. And now our paths should just start with a slash. So I'll take out the / public. We'll see how that does for us. There, better and cleaner. So our bootstrap shows up. Our JavaScript links are local now. So by bringing everything locally, it's going to run faster, and we get access to all those classes in our code editor, which we didn't get when we were using the CDN. Okay, so our paths, just like with EJS, just starts with a slash because we've set public as the root. So my two style sheets are / style sheets, and my JavaScripts are / JavaScripts. So if we wanted to display any images, our path to any image file would just be / images.
And Error, it's just failed to look up view error in views directory.
Okay. Make sure you've taken the error handling out of app.js. Take it out.
Yeah. All right.
So the other thing we should change, now is probably a good time for us to make a server folder and move our route and our controller in there, which will also mean changing a few paths. I'm just going to close this up for a second so we can see. So in our root now, we've got client, config, models, node modules, and routes. So I'm going to make a server folder in my root, new directory called server. I'm going to move routes inside of it. And WebStorm will rewrite the paths for me, which is great. So any references there are going to get updated. So I'll say search for references. Great. And then I'm going to move my models inside of here as well. So now we've basically only got a few folders. We've got the base Express configuration in bin and config, as well as app.js package.json. And then all our application code is divided into the server backend and our Angular front end. One more thing I'm going to do. It's always bugged me that the Express generator creates a folder called routes. I really would prefer to call that controllers, because that's what those files are. Name this, which I don't know I can do here. Hang on, I think I may have to do it through my.
I think in WebStorm is under refactor.
Ah, thank you.
And now we have 4 4s on all our files.
Okay, so there's a path problem. So I'm going to change routes to controllers. You don't have to do this. So now notice it rewrote my paths in app.js. These are now in server controllers. And inside of my so we'll create a game controller shortly. But everything still runs. So we don't see any functional difference by organizing our architecture this way. Now there's other ways of organizing your code. This isn't the only way. I'm just doing it in the way that seems to make the most sense to me. So our Express controllers and models are inside of server. Here's our Angular configuration in the client root. And then inside of app, we've got our static assets, and then finally our views. So all our HTML will go there. You may see tutorials or developers who organize things differently. Inside of app, they may make a folder for every component. So they have like a publisher's component with the TypeScript and HTML there. A games component with the TypeScript and HTML in a subfolder. We're building a single page application, so I don't feel we really need a separate games folder inside of here. But some people might like that structure of creating that. Any questions so far?
I'm not sure what my problem is with the
So you're getting a 404 error?
on everything.
Okay.
It doesn't come up 4 but I mean, in the command you find it shows up.
So make sure your view path in app.js exists, that you've got app and views,
Yeah.
and your index.html is there.
And
You need this, you may or may not.
Yeah, I already have all that too.
Okay, and in index.js, you calling res.render?
Yep, on index.
Mm-hmm.
And then the index.html, that's the only place I'd see that.
Yep. We'll take a break in a minute and I'll look.
You can just get rid of the public part and just do slash. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we set the static path now as client app public.
And then it takes the relative.
So it's relative. So that is now the root for all of our assets.
Okay. That probably fixed it.
So it also makes this a little cleaner if, let's say, we're working with somebody else, right? Matt and I are going to work together, and Matt's doing the Angular and HTML front end. Well, everything he does is in here, inside client. If I'm doing the back end, I just work on the server piece. And everything's kind of neatly encapsulated that way. So inside of app right now, we have public and views. We're going to create 2 more folders. We'll leave them blank for now, but we're going to need a components folder and a services folder. So we'll make those blank folders. So inside of client and app, make 2 new directories. One called components and one called services. Again, not the only way of architecting this, but I think this makes sense and it sort of follows along with this structure, right? We already have a folder for models, we have a folder for controllers, we have a folder for our Angular views, but we're going to need separate places to keep our services and components. So our structure architecture is pretty much done now. So I think this is a good time for us to take a pause. I'm going to stop the video stream here. I will upload what I've done so far to GitHub. And we haven't really done much in terms of logic. All this is just setup.